I've been testing the Pimax Dream Air SE non-stop for the past 2 weeks, and this headset is kind of a big deal. Not because it's perfect, it definitely isn't, but because somehow Pimax made a lightweight micro-OLED PCVR headset that's actually reasonably priced. And after using it back-to-back against the Beyond 2 and the regular Dream Air, I think this might become the go-to high-end PCVR headset for a lot of people. By the way, Pimax sent this to me for review, but they're seeing this at the same time you are. There's also an affiliate discount link in the description if you want to support the channel. Now let's start with the part most of you actually care about, the visuals, lenses and displays. On paper, the Dream Air SE is actually very similar to the Beyond 2. They both use pancake lenses and the same 2560 by 2560 micro-OLED panels per eye, which means both headsets are capable of producing good visuals. But there is an important caveat here. Neither headset can actually run those displays at full native resolution while also running at 90 Hz. So while the panels themselves are always 2560 by 2560, switching to 90 Hz mean the image is internally rendered at a much lower resolution, and then upscaled back to the panel resolution. And you can see it. The image definitely becomes softer at 90 Hz compared to 72 Hz. Not unusually blurry or anything dramatic like that, but there is an absolutely visible loss in sharpness. That being said, micro-OLED behaves very differently to LCD when it comes to motion clarity. So 72 Hz here still feels surprisingly smooth, while 90 Hz feels very responsive. And 90 Hz on these micro-OLED headsets feels closer to 120 Hz on a lot of LCD headsets I've used. Personally, same as with the Beyond 2, I'd probably use the Dream Air SE mostly in 72 Hz mode. You get the full native resolution, the image looks noticeably sharper, and if you've got a powerful PC, you can always super sample it even further and get an incredibly clean image out of this thing. Visually overall though, I've been really impressed. The colors look fantastic, contrast is exactly what you'd expect from micro-OLEDs, and I genuinely can't believe we've gotten to a point where you can get an image that looks this good at this price point. But where things started getting really interesting for me was when I compared it directly against the Beyond 2. Because despite them using the same displays, the Dream Air SE actually handled some of the compromises of micro-OLED noticeably better. For example, persistence, or that smeary trailing effect you notice when moving your head quickly side to sides, is significantly better controlled here than on the Beyond 2. On the Beyond 2, the smearing can get pretty aggressive, especially at higher brightness levels, and you can see this all over Reddit from people asking about it. Lowering the brightness does help a bit, but then the image also loses a lot of that punchy OLED look. The Dream Air SE still has some persistence, especially compared to the regular Dream Air, but it's dramatically less distracting than the Beyond 2, even at higher brightness levels. My guess is that the cooling system is probably playing a pretty big role there, because the difference is larger than I expected considering they're using the same displays. Glare was another pleasant surprise. Micro-OLED can look incredible, but if the lenses aren't extremely well designed, glare can become distracting really fast. And while the Beyond 2 improved this a lot compared to the original Beyond, it still has pretty noticeable glare in brighter scenes. The Dream Air SE, on the other hand, handles glare much better than I expected. It's still there, especially compared to the regular Dream Air, but it's nowhere near being a deal breaker for me. Edge-to-edge clarity is also pretty solid here. I'd say around maybe 85% of the lens stays inside the sweet spot before gradually softening towards the outer edges. Now at the very edges, you do still get a bit of chromatic aberration, mostly color shifting where reds start leaning orange and blues kind of shift towards magenta, but overall it's very well controlled. And in terms of mirror up, I'm happy to report I genuinely couldn't notice any. Now speaking of the regular Dream Air, yes, it's still the better headset visually overall. Its larger lenses and higher resolution panels absolutely give it the edge in overall clarity. And the new concave view lenses are honestly kind of ridiculous in terms of glare control and image quality. But it's also twice the price of the Dream Air SE, and that's the thing that kept popping in my head while using this headset. Because the Dream Air SE doesn't feel like a cheap compromise headset. It feels more like Pimax looked at a lot of the compromises the Beyond 2 made and just handled them better while also somehow making the headset cheaper. And if I had to choose between the Beyond 2 and the Dream Air SE specifically, I'd pick the Dream Air SE every single time. Now physically, the Dream Air SE is basically identical to the regular Dream Air. Same overall design, same housing, same build quality. The only real visual difference is that the side stems are white on the SE instead of black as on the Dream Air. But interestingly, the SE is actually even lighter. The regular Dream Air already felt very light at around 170 grams, but the Dream Air SE drops that down to roughly 140 grams. Likely because of the smaller displays and lenses. And you feel that immediately. This thing is ridiculously lightweight on your face. Even during faster games or longer sessions, it almost disappears after a while in a way that very few headsets do. Now, same as the regular Dream Air, I do think the stock facial interface is just okay. It works, but it could definitely be more plush, a bit more flexible, and spread pressure across a larger area. I've seen some people on Reddit snipping the two top supports on the facial interface to make it flex more naturally against your foreheads, although I haven't personally tried that myself because I've already completely modded mine anyway. I swapped the facial interface for a custom 3D printed one and paired it with a studio foam cushion I already had lying around. And the comfort improvement was massive. I've also designed my own adapter so I can use the Beyond head strap or the Beyond audio strap with the Dream Air, which makes it unbelievably comfortable. I'll probably make a full separate video on all these mods because I think there's a lot of potential here once you start customizing it a bit. And because the Dream Air and the Dream Air SE share the exact same housing, all of these mods and accessories work on both headsets. As for the included strap itself, both the Dream Air and the SE ship with Pimax 2D strap, and it's fine. It's not some luxury comfort masterpiece or anything, but for such a tiny and lightweight headset, it does the job surprisingly well without becoming too annoying. Although personally there was one tiny corner near the connection point of the head strap that kept digging into my ear slightly, so I literally just cut that part off with scissors and never thought about it again. Highly scientific solution there. Build quality overall has also been solid. The plastic itself doesn't really feel ultra premium in the hand, especially comparing it with something like the Beyond 2, which honestly feels like a tiny piece of futuristic art. But weirdly enough, I actually kind of appreciate the direction Pimax went in here. Because while the Beyond 2 looks absolutely beautiful externally, I think Pimax focused way more of their effort on the actual experience of using the headsets rather than making it feel like jewelry for your shelf. And realistically, that matters way more. VR headsets are meant to disappear on your face while you're using them, not sit on a desk looking pretty. That said, the Dream Air SE still isn't perfect physically. I do really like the split cable design where half the cable runs down each side before combining into a single cable lower down, because it helps keep the headset balanced really nicely. But the little connection point where those cables merge still kinda sits around the back of your neck, which isn't the most comfy solution in the world. Thankfully though, one issue I had with the regular Dream Air is improved here. On the original Dream Air, that little connector box got surprisingly hot during longer sessions. On the SE, it still gets warm, but nowhere near as noticeably hot. And overall thermals while actually wearing the headset have been excellent. Even during really long sessions, the headset never got uncomfortable on my face, never made my eyes feel hot, and never reached the point where I actively noticed the heat while playing. For something this small and lightweight, the overall comfort here is actually really impressive. Now, in terms of field of view and binocular overlap, the Dream Air SE actually ended up being really interesting. Using the stock facial interface, I measured around 100 degrees horizontal by 92 vertical in test HMD, with a binocular overlap of roughly 81% using FOV. And the first thing that surprised me when seeing those numbers was the vertical FOV, because compared to the regular Dream Air, which I measured at around 110 horizontal by 90 vertical, the SE actually ends up being slightly taller vertically despite using the smaller lenses. Now, with the custom facial interface that gets my eyes closer to the lenses, I can squeeze a few more degrees out of it in both directions, probably getting pretty close to Pimax's claimed 105 degrees of horizontal FOV. But the more interesting comparison here is again with the Beyond 2, because on paper the Beyond 2 beats the Dream Air SE in field of view, and not by a small margin. I measured around 108 horizontal by 102 vertical on the Beyond 2, which sounds massively better. But then you look at the binocular overlap. The Beyond 2 only gave me around 74% overlap compared to roughly 81 on the Dream Air SE and around 85 on the regular Dream Air. And personally, I think that trade-off matters a lot more than raw FOV numbers sometimes suggest. Because while the Beyond 2 definitely feels more open visually, it also feels noticeably more fatiguing to my eyes during longer sessions. Whereas on both the Dream Air and the Dream Air SE, my eyes feel extremely relaxed even after using them for hours and hours at a time. And I think that's something a lot of people underestimate until they actually spend serious time inside these headsets. A slightly bigger FOV sounds amazing on paper, but if achieving that means sacrificing binocular overlap to the point where your eyes feel strained afterwards, I don't necessarily think that's worth it. Now, the nice thing here is that Pimax actually lets you adjust the binocular overlap behavior manually if you want to prioritize FOV more aggressively. Right now it requires editing config files, although according to Pimax, the proper controls for this should eventually actually be added directly into Pimax Play. So theoretically, you can probably push the Dream Air SE much closer to the Beyond 2 in terms of the actual FOV, if that's your preference. But in its default configuration, I think Pimax made the right choice here, with overall eye comfort on the Dream Air SE being excellent. And after using all three headsets extensively, I'd honestly take the slightly lower FOV with the better overlap and comfort balance any day. Oh, and just for reference, my IPD is 67. Now in terms of audio, the Dream Air SE uses the exact same built-in speakers as the regular Dream Air, and they're surprisingly decent. They're not gonna absolutely blow you away or anything, but they sound clear, spatial positioning is good, and there's a decent amount of bass for their size. And I think built-in audio is essential, because one of the biggest advantages of something this small is just how quick and effortless it feels to jump into VR. And having integrated audio instead of needing separate headphones every time genuinely helps with that experience a lot. It's also still infinitely better than having no audio at all like the Beyond 2. Although funnily enough, if you use the Beyond audio strap on the Dream Air or the Dream Air SE like I have, it actually sounds noticeably better than it does on the Beyond 2 itself. Volume is higher, overall sound quality is better, and it feels weirdly more at home here than it does on the headset it was originally designed for. As for the microphone, it's decent. Definitely a step up from older Pimax headsets, although I'll let you hear it for yourselves. Okay, so to give you an idea of how the microphone on the Dream Air SE sounds, this is it. You can judge for yourselves. Now in terms of performance, the Dream Air SE ended up being way easier to run than I expected. And that's a really important part of why I think this headset will become very popular. Because yes, as I mentioned earlier, the headset does have two very different operating modes. At 72Hz, it runs at the full native panel resolution of 2560 per eye, which translates to roughly 3116 by 3072 in SteamVR once distortion correction is factored in. Meanwhile, at 90Hz, the image is internally rendered at a much lower resolution before being upscaled back to the displays, which obviously gives you significantly better performance but at the cost of some visible sharpness. After testing both modes extensively, I still personally prefer using it at 72Hz. The image looks noticeably cleaner and sharper overall, while still feeling surprisingly smooth thanks to the way micro-OLED handles motion clarity. But the really impressive thing here is that even at full native resolution in 72Hz mode, performance is genuinely excellent. I tested the Dream Air SE on systems with a 3070, 4090 and 5090, and all three were able to drive the headset really well at 100% render resolution. And of course while hitting the full refresh rate in most of the games I tested. And once you move into higher-end GPUs like the 4090 or especially the 5090, you can start doing some pretty ridiculous super sampling. On the 5090, I was comfortably pushing 200% render resolution while still getting fantastic performance in both modes. And honestly, this is the point where the Dream Air SE started feeling kind of ridiculous to me. Because usually with small form factor micro-OLED headsets, you expect to sacrifice something major. Performance, comfort, tracking, price, something. But the more I used this thing, the more it started to feel like Pimax somehow found a much better balance than I expected. Because unlike something like the regular Dream Air, which is pushing nearly 4K per eye and really benefits from a high-end GPU if you want to take full advantage of it, the Dream Air SE gives you a lot more flexibility. You can run it really well on more modest hardware today and then continue scaling image quality upwards later if you upgrade your PC down the line. On top of that, both the Dream Air and the Dream Air SE include built-in Tobii eye tracking, which works extremely well and lets you take advantage of things like dynamic foveated rendering and quad views to reduce GPU load even further. And I think the combination of visual quality, performance efficiency, and price is exactly why this headset is going to become such a big deal. Because for once, we finally have a genuinely high-end looking micro-OLED PCVR headset that doesn't also require a completely absurd PC just to run properly. Now in terms of tracking, I went into the Dream Air SE review expecting it to be fine at best. Not terrible, but also not something I'd actively recommend over Lighthouse tracking for anything beyond casual gaming. But surprisingly, this actually ended up being one of the biggest improvements over older Pimax inside-out systems. Because throughout my testing, I genuinely didn't experience any noticeable controller drift, tracking loss, or weird instability issues at all. And this was across a bunch of different lighting conditions too, from a brightly lit room all the way down to a pretty dim environment. Now obviously, because this is still camera-based tracking, you can't really use it in complete darkness unless you add something like a cheap IR illuminator. But realistically, that's true for basically every inside-out tracked headset anyway. Controller latency also felt perfectly good for me. Though to be fair, I'm not some competitive Beat Saber player measuring millisecond differences or anything, but I played everything from Half-Life Alyx to Forefront and never once found myself thinking about the actual tracking negatively while actually playing. And that really surprised me because my memory of older Pimax controller tracking was basically, yeah, it works. Mostly. But this feels genuinely much more mature now. Now, unfortunately, the controllers themselves are still the older ringed Pimax controllers, and I still haven't heard much about the newer ringless controllers that Pimax showed off a while back, so I'm not really sure what's happening there. But in actual use, the tracking experience itself has been genuinely solid. And because this is the Dream Air SE Slam version specifically, these cameras also enable things like hand tracking and pass-through. Now, the pass-through, even though it's only black and white and fairly low resolution, is still really useful to have. Because even if you're not using it for mixed reality or anything fancy, just being able to quickly grab a drink, check your keyboard, or just interact with the real world without taking the headset off is genuinely convenient. And personally, I'd still take this over having no pass-through at all, like on the Lighthouse version of the Dream Air. Now, with all that said, the Dream Air SE obviously still isn't perfect. There are still a few compromises here and there, although far fewer than I expected going into this headset. For example, as I've mentioned before, there is still some glare occasionally, especially in higher contrast scenes, and there's also a bit of chromatic aberration right at the very edges of the lenses. Nothing major and definitely much better controlled than on the Beyond 2, but it is still there. And same as the regular Dream Air, I also don't think the current facial interface and head strap are really the final form this headset deserves. They're usable and perfectly fine for a lot of people, but I do think the comfort improves massively once you start modding it a bit. The problem, of course, is that not everyone has access to a 3D printer and wants to spend time customizing a headset like that. So while I absolutely love the potential of the Dream Air platform from a comfort perspective, I still think Pimax could improve the out-of-the-box experience further. These aren't deal breakers for me personally, but they're absolutely things you should know before buying. Beyond those things though, the overall experience here has been surprisingly polished. Software stability has been solid for me, reliability has been good, tracking has been surprisingly flawless, and I've had no issues with thermals, and visually the headset genuinely looks fantastic for the price. Now obviously, if money is no object and you want the absolute best possible visual experience, the regular Dream Air or the Pimax Crystal Super are still on another level. The larger lenses, the higher resolution panels, and the overall optical stack are just objectively better. But considering the Dream Air SE costs roughly half as much, I honestly feel like you're getting way more than half the experience. And that's what makes this headset feel so important to me. So ultimately, I think the Dream Air SE ends up being a really easy headset to recommend at this price point. The Lighthouse version starts at $899, while the Slam version I've been testing, which includes the inside-out tracking cameras and the controllers, comes in at $1199. Now compare that to something like the Beyond 2, where the base Lighthouse version without eye tracking starts at $1069, while the Beyond 2e jumps to $1219. And at this point, I genuinely think the Dream Air SE becomes the much stronger overall package. Because not only are you getting integrated audio, built-in Tobii eye tracking, better glare handling, better persistence handling, better comfort potential, optional slam tracking, and just a more complete overall experience, it's also somehow cheaper. Now obviously, if it's within your budget, the regular Dream Air is still considerably better. But at $1999 for the Lighthouse version and $2299 for the Slam version, it's also very clearly positioned as the premium no-compromise option. The Dream Air SE, on the other hand, feels like the sweet spot. And I think that's what makes this headset such a big deal. Because for the first time in a long time, it feels like there's finally a genuinely high-end micro-OLED small form factor PCVR headset that normal enthusiasts can realistically justify buying without needing an absurd budget. I genuinely don't think there's currently a better value headset in this category right now. And if I was shopping for a compact micro-OLED PCVR headset today, the Dream Air SE would probably be the one I'd buy. Also, if you do decide to pick one up, there's an affiliate link down in the description that'll save you a bit of money on it as well. Let me know if you have any questions. Here are 2 other videos to check out next, and I'll catch you soon. Cheers, guys!